550 horsepower and a near six-figure price tag, the 2022 Jaguar F-Pace SVR isn't as unique as you might think, especially when you consider that there are about as many super SUVs as there are supercars these days. So in order to stand out, this Jag draws a line in the sand and focuses almost exclusively on performance. And I've been driving it over the last week or so, so I'm going to tell you what it's like with a run through the canyons. Now, before we dive into any of that, I want to make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel because we have a ton of new content coming to DuPont Registry and you don't want to miss any of it. Right off the bat, I have to be honest, I have such a huge soft spot in my heart for the 5-liter supercharged V8 that's under the hood in front of me. I've driven it in the Range Rover SVR, in the F-Type, and it is such a fantastic engine. It really brings forth a very muscle car sort of persona out of whatever car it's in, even if it's a refined Range Rover, and it makes of a sports car a freaking wild machine. So in an SUV, 5-liter V8, supercharged, 550 horsepower. What does that feel like? Well, it feels like a lot. Even in this configuration with this big, heavy body on top of it, this SUV can still reach, unsurprisingly, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. It's very quick, and on the road it feels really fast. Now, one thing right off the bat you have to know about this Jag, this is a very stiff car. Very, very stiff ride. For example, I had an Aston Martin Vantage Formula 1 edition. You probably saw the video on that. And I would argue that is about as stiff as this is, if not perhaps a little bit softer. So very stiff SUV. It really, like I mentioned earlier, it makes a statement as being a very, very performance-oriented SUV. It feels surprisingly planted 90% of the way. It drives surprisingly nice. And it's surprisingly stable, even, you know, when we take these corners at higher speed. It doesn't sort of lose its composure right up to about 90%. Push beyond that and you're gonna get some understeer and it kind of gets a little twitchy. But other than that, it's very composed right up to that sort of, you know, 9/10. You have that trade-off where this within the super SUV spectrum is definitely more on the stiff side, more on the sporty side. But again, if that's what you want, if you want to feel like you're in something sporty most of the time, then the SVR is for you. Now, as far as my super SUVs, my sporty SUVs, this is where I lean in that sort of equation, because I get it that some of them need to be comfortable, and I totally understand why someone would want that. But for me, I think if it's the only car I can have, I want big speed, I want big performance, and I just want the practicality to be the added benefit. It's a fast, fun thing I like to drive that just so happens to be able to carry my family around. But up here, I will say that having driven the Vantage recently, the Lotus, I'm not having significantly less fun hustling this so fast. I'm like I was mentioning, I'm not having less fun up here in this massive SUV, and I actually, the fact that it's not quite as planted as, say, like a low-slung supercar, it gives you a little bit of extra roll, which is actually kind of fun. It makes it a little interesting. This is a really strong contender, and I love the redesign on the F-Pace. The F-Pace to me was already one of the most beautiful SUVs on sale. The current Jaguar lineup just, it looks stunning. And the improvements that they've made for this sort of mid-cycle refresh have been significant, namely in the realms of aerodynamics. So this car's front end design reduces lift by 35%, which is pretty drastic. And when you have an SUV where aerodynamics are actually pretty important, and so not only is the design of this massive SUV beautiful, it's actually useful in its purpose. And also the interior is quite beautiful. I mean, this is a near six-figure SUV. I think the as-tested price for this one is $97,000. So the interior finishing is up there. I think it is perhaps a situation where you're really paying for the performance over the interior. Don't get me wrong, this cabin is beautiful. The new screen is fantastic. I have a digital dash in front of me. It's definitely up to date with the latest tech. But in terms of comfort and finishing, it's pretty solid in here. I mean, this seat holds me in place nicely, but it's still very comfortable. So in terms of the actual interior and the things that you touch, I think it's getting up there to being, you know, a proper six-figure SUV. Another thing that the F-Pace SVR actually does well is in terms of refinement. It's actually not very loud in here. Granted, right now I have the exhaust turned to loud, but if I click that off, and obviously, well, hold on, we gotta go into drive, click the exhaust off, perfectly docile. Can't hear it. I can still carry, you know, good speed into these corners, but it's not loud and not sort of crazy. But we want exhaust on. We want the sporty everything. But like I was mentioning, and I think the overall theme of my time with the F-Pace is that I'm still having a ton of fun hustling this thing around. And the fact that, you know, I have space for more people, I've brought other people up here in the canyons, and you can really share the experience with more people than just being, you know, in your sort of two-seater supercar. But I think this engine is just the way that it sounds. This is, I get it, a super SUV, but it's almost like a muscle car SUV. It's almost like Europe's Hellcat in a way, where it feels very sort of burly and just sort of tough. And I think that's all thanks to that the engine note of that supercharged V8. So overall, this is a very, very fun SUV. Honestly, as far as super SUVs go, this is one of my favorite and one of the best handling ones I've driven pretty much ever, actually. After having driven a wide spectrum of the latest super SUV offerings, I'm gonna go ahead and say this is one of the most fun to drive and the most sort of alive feeling. And I think the balance that it strikes is that it's refined when you want it to be, but it can also be sort of loud and in your face when you want to be. So there's not this sort of huge compromise where you're doing great speed, but then you don't get any of the sound or any of the emotion. I think that's where the F-Pace SVR kind of stands in its own league. So I really hope you enjoyed watching this quick review of the F-Pace SVR. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. I have a bunch of content coming up with a ton of the latest and greatest supercars, sports cars, super SUVs, just about everything coming to this channel. So I'm sure you don't want to miss any of that. Until then, my name is Gabriel, and I hope you have a good time. I'll see you soon.